I never imagined that buying my childhood apartment complex would lead to the most satisfying revenge I'd ever experienced. But when Kathy Mendelsohn screamed at my twins for playing tag on the lawn, a lawn I technically owned, I knew exactly why I'd invested my life savings into this place. 3 weeks earlier, I'd gotten a call that would change everything. "Mr. Owen? This is Marcus from Pinnacle Real Estate. I've got some news about Sycamore Gardens." I'd grown up in Sycamore Gardens, a modest apartment complex with 12 units and a surprisingly spacious communal yard. My mom had raised me there as a single parent, working double shifts at the hospital. When I joined the Army at 18, I promised myself I'd come back someday and buy her a real house. I never got the chance. Cancer took her when I was deployed overseas. But Sycamore Gardens had remained special to me. "They're selling?" I asked, my pulse quickening. "The owner's looking to offload it quickly. Health issues. He's asking below market value, but it's still a substantial investment." After my discharge, I'd started a security consulting business that had done unexpectedly well. I'd set aside money for years, planning to invest in real estate eventually. This felt like fate. "I'm interested," I said. "Very interested." 2 weeks of frantic paperwork, loan approvals, and sleepless nights followed. I decided to keep the purchase quiet until everything was finalized. The previous owner had been an absentee landlord who'd hired a property management company, which had in turn allowed the HOA to handle most day-to-day issues. The HOA president, a woman named Kathy Mendelsohn, had apparently taken her position very seriously. I'd moved my twins, Max and Mia, into Unit 4B 3 months earlier. We needed a place after my divorce, and the coincidence of an opening at my childhood home had seemed perfect. I hadn't counted on dealing with Kathy. "Daddy, the mean lady yelled at us again," Mia had reported just days after we moved in. "We were just sitting on the grass reading. She said children should be seen and not heard," Max added. "But we weren't even being loud." I'd planned to introduce myself to this Kathy person, but my business had kept me busy. The kids had continued to report uncomfortable encounters, being told the sidewalk chalk was vandalism, that their bicycles couldn't be parked near our door, that their voices carried too much when they played. I was still planning my approach when the paperwork finalized and I officially became the owner of Sycamore Gardens. I'd signed the final documents that morning, feeling a strange mixture of pride and disbelief. I owned the place where my mom and I had struggled for so many years. I planned to make some much-needed improvements while keeping rents affordable, the kind of landlord I wished we'd had. I was heading home to tell the kids the news when I heard the screaming. "This is absolutely unacceptable. This is not a playground. People live here who deserve peace and quiet." I rounded the corner to see my 8-year-olds frozen in place on the lawn, looking terrified. A woman in her 50s with an expensive-looking blonde bob and designer sunglasses was standing over them, finger-pointing, voice at maximum volume. "I've told you repeatedly that running games are prohibited on the community lawn. Where is your father? Does he have any sense of responsibility at all?" I stepped forward, my hands instinctively balling into fists. "I'm right here." Kathy Mendelsohn turned, her expression shifting from rage to a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Owen, I've been trying to reach you. Your children continue to violate community guidelines. I've documented 7 separate infractions this month alone." I looked at Max and Mia. "Go inside, guys. I'll be there in a minute." They scampered toward our unit, throwing nervous glances over their shoulders. "Ms. Mendelsohn, I presume?" I kept my voice even. Years of military service and then negotiating security contracts had taught me to control my emotions. "Mrs. Mendelsohn," she corrected with a tight smile. "HOA president for the past 8 years. And you've accumulated quite a file since moving in." "A file?" I raised an eyebrow. "Violations. Noise complaints. Your children's outdoor activities. The unapproved welcome mat. The potted plant that exceeds size regulations. The blinds in your front window that aren't the approved shade of white." She rattled these off like serious criminal offenses. I wasn't aware of these concerns, I said carefully. I've left 3 notices on your door and sent 5 emails. Her smile tightened. Perhaps if you were home more often to properly supervise your children, we wouldn't have these issues. Single fathers often struggle with the basics of, I'm going to stop you right there, I interrupted. My parenting isn't up for discussion. And as for the rest of it, I think we need to have a broader conversation. Indeed we do. The HOA board meets next Tuesday. I've scheduled a hearing about your violations. Fines will likely be imposed. She checked her watch ostentatiously. Now I have an appointment. Please keep your children off the lawn. This isn't a public park. As she turned to leave, something in me snapped. Not in an out-of-control way, but in the calm, decisive way that had served me well in crisis situations. Mrs. Mendelsohn, I think you should know that as of 10 o'clock this morning, I own Sycamore Gardens. She froze mid-step, then turned slowly. Excuse me? The sale finalized today. I now own the entire complex. I smiled pleasantly. So technically, my children were playing on my lawn. Her mouth opened and closed several times. That's impossible. We would have been notified if the property was for sale. Not necessarily. The previous owner had every right to sell privately. I watched the implications work through her mind. Perhaps we should schedule that broader conversation sooner rather than later? I'd like to review the HOA bylaws and recent decisions. Well, this is highly irregular. Her composure cracked further. I'll need to see documentation, of course. Of course. And I'll need to see the HOA financial records and meeting minutes for the past 3 years. I maintained my pleasant smile. I understand there's quite a hefty reserve fund. A flash of something, was it fear, crossed her face before she recovered. Everything is in perfect order, Mr. Owen. The HOA has been managed impeccably under my leadership. I'm sure it has. Tuesday, then? For our meeting? She nodded stiffly and walked away, her shoulders unnaturally rigid. Inside our apartment, the twins were waiting anxiously. Are we in trouble, Dad? Max asked. I scooped them both into a hug. Not at all. Actually, I have some big news. Remember how I told you Grandma and I used to live in this building when I was a kid? They nodded. Well, now we own it. The whole building, the lawn, everything. Their eyes widened comically. The whole building? Mia gasped. Yep. And you can play on that lawn anytime you want. What about me, Ms. Mendelsohn? Max asked. I'm going to have a talk with her. Things are going to change around here. What I didn't tell them was the nagging feeling I had that something wasn't right with the HOA. Kathy's reaction to my ownership, her defensiveness about the financials, it triggered the same instincts that had kept me alive in combat zones. That evening, I made some calls to the other residents. I introduced myself as the new owner and casually asked about their experiences with the HOA. A pattern quickly emerged. The fees keep going up, but nothing ever gets fixed, said Mrs. Lopez from 2A. I got fined $200 because my holiday lights were up 3 days past the deadline, Mr. Chun from 1C told me. They installed those ridiculous decorative rocks instead of fixing the broken playground equipment, said Alicia Washington, a young mother from 3B. By Sunday night, I had compiled a troubling picture. The HOA fees had doubled in 5 years. The reserve fund supposedly contained over $120,000, yet basic maintenance was neglected. Multiple residents reported excessive fines for minor infractions, but no one could recall seeing financial statements despite requesting them. On Monday, I contacted a lawyer friend who specialized in real estate. After explaining the situation, he agreed to join me for Tuesday's meeting. Bring all the documentation you have, Ben suggested. And don't be surprised if Kathy comes prepared for battle. He wasn't wrong. When we arrived at the community room Tuesday evening, Kathy was already there with 2 other board members, her husband, Philip Mendelsohn, who served as treasurer, and her friend Diane Becker, the secretary. The remaining residents filtered in gradually, many looking surprised to see me seated at the front table rather than in the audience. Kathy called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. Before we begin, I'd like to address the rumor that has been circulating. Yes, Sycamore Gardens has a new owner, Mr. Brian Irwin from Unit 4B. She gestured toward me without making eye contact. This does not affect the HOA's authority or our established rules and regulations. My lawyer friend Ben cleared his throat. Actually, Mrs. Mendelsohn, it may affect quite a lot. As the property owner, Mr. Irwin has certain rights regarding the HOA's scope and governance. Kathy's smile tightened further. And you are? Benjamin Jackson, real estate attorney. He placed his business card on the table. I've reviewed your HOA covenant, and I have several questions about recent amendments and financial decisions. Murmurs rippled through the room. Kathy's husband shifted uncomfortably. This meeting has an agenda, Kathy said firmly. We'll address any questions at the appropriate time. First, we have violation hearings to conduct. Actually, I interjected, as the new owner, I'm exercising my right to call for an immediate review of the HOA's financial records before any other business is conducted. That's not, she began. It's outlined quite clearly in Section 7 of your own bylaws, Ben added helpfully. Philip Mendelsohn stood abruptly. The financial records are in perfect order, but they're not available at this precise moment. We'll need to schedule a separate meeting for that review. That's unfortunate, I replied, because I've already filed a formal request with the state's Department of Business Oversight regarding the HOA's financial practices. They seem particularly interested in the significant increase in fees without corresponding property improvements. The color drained from Kathy's face. That's completely unnecessary. We've managed this community responsibly for years. Then you'll have no problem producing complete financial statements, including bank records for the reserve fund. I looked directly at Philip. The fund that supposedly contains over $120,000. An older resident at the back called out, I've been asking to see those records for 3 years. Others joined in, suddenly emboldened to share their frustrations. Kathy rapped her gavel frantically. Order! This is not how we conduct business. Perhaps we should adjourn and reconvene when you've had time to gather the financial records, Ben suggested smoothly. Say, tomorrow afternoon? With complete bank statements? Philip whispered something urgently to Kathy, who looked increasingly cornered. Fine, she snapped. Tomorrow at 4. But I want to be clear that these accusations are completely unfounded and potentially defamatory. As the meeting broke up, residents clustered around me, sharing stories of Kathy's tyrannical rule, the arbitrary fines, the selectively enforced rules, the improvements promised but never delivered. Alicia Washington pulled me aside. There's something else you should know. 3 months ago, we were all charged a $500 special assessment for roof repairs. But the only work done was on the Mendelsohn section of the roof. I thanked her for the information and headed home, my suspicions growing stronger by the minute. That night, I did some research on HOA fraud cases and contacted a forensic accountant recommended by Ben. The next day, 15 minutes before the scheduled meeting, my phone rang. It was Ben. The Mendelsohns are moving things out of their apartment. Right now. Loading up their SUV. I jogged outside just in time to see Philip hurriedly stuffing suitcases into their vehicle while Kathy supervised, repeatedly checking her watch. Going somewhere? I called out. They both startled. Philip dropped a bag. Family emergency, Kathy replied, not meeting my eyes. We need to reschedule the meeting. That's quite a coincidence, I said, walking closer. Emergency happening right before you need to produce financial records. This is harassment, she sputtered. We're in a hurry. I'm sure the police won't take long, I replied, pulling out my phone. I've already contacted them about the potential embezzlement. They seemed very interested in speaking with you both. Philip's face crumpled. Kathy, we need to go now. Nobody's going anywhere, came a firm voice behind me. I turned to see Officer Ramirez, a local cop I'd met through my security business. Mr. and Mrs. Mendelsohn? We'd like to ask you some questions about the Sycamore Gardens HOA finances. What followed was a textbook case of what happens when petty tyrants get caught. Philip cracked immediately, admitting they had borrowed from the reserve fund for years, using the money for luxury vacations, a timeshare in Maui, and their daughter's college tuition. Kathy maintained her innocence longer, blaming everything on Philip and Diane, until bank records proved she had been the primary architect of the scheme. The forensic accountant eventually determined they had stolen over $87,000 through fabricated vendor invoices, inflated maintenance costs, and undocumented administrative fees. The special assessment for the roof had been their most brazen theft, almost $6,000 collected for repairs that cost less than $1,000 and only benefited their unit. Both Mendelsohns were arrested and charged with multiple counts of embezzlement and fraud. Diane Becker, who had turned state's evidence, received probation for her lesser role in the scheme. In the aftermath, I called a community meeting to discuss the future. First, I want to apologize, I told the gathered residents. As the new owner, I should have looked into the HOA situation immediately. You exposed them, Mrs. Lopez pointed out. No one else managed that in 8 years. Moving forward, I'm proposing we dissolve the current HOA structure, I continued. Instead, we'll form a resident advisory committee that meets monthly to discuss maintenance needs and community issues. No mandatory fees beyond your rent, which I promise will remain stable for at least 2 years. The proposal was met with enthusiastic approval. What about the stolen money? Someone asked. We're unlikely to recover much, I admitted. But I'm committing to making the repairs and improvements that should have happened, starting with the playground equipment and the leaky roof in Building B. Over the following months, Sycamore Gardens transformed. We installed new playground equipment, repaired all outstanding maintenance issues, and even added a community garden in the corner of the lawn. Monthly potluck dinners replaced combative HOA meetings. Residents started greeting each other instead of avoiding eye contact. The lawn became the heart of the community again, with children playing freely and adults gathering for weekend barbecues. My twins thrived, making friends throughout the complex and proudly telling everyone that their dad owned the whole place. 6 months after the Mendelsohns' arrest, they both pleaded guilty to reduced charges in exchange for full restitution. Though we knew we'd likely never see most of that money, the justice felt satisfying. One evening, as I watched Max and Mia playing tag with other children on the lawn that had once been forbidden territory, Alicia Washington joined me on the bench. You know what I realized? She said. This is the first place I've lived where I'm not anxious about breaking some rule I didn't know existed. I nodded. That was always the plan. I grew up here with a mom who worked constantly just to keep a roof over our heads. The last thing she needed was to worry about being fined because her welcome mat was the wrong color. Well, you've created something special. She smiled. Though I still can't believe you bought an entire apartment complex just to stick it to an HOA, Karen. I laughed. That wasn't the original plan. But I'd be lying if I said it wasn't a satisfying bonus. As the sun set over our little community, I thought about my mom. She would have loved seeing what Sycamore Gardens had become, not just a place to live, but a true neighborhood. Sometimes the best revenge isn't confrontation but creation, building something better from the ashes of what was broken. And whenever I remembered Kathy Mendelsohn's face when I told her I owned the complex she'd been terrorizing, well, that was just the cherry on top.